Be turning in your Bibles, if you will, to the 4th chapter of Proverbs. Proverbs 4. About 30 years ago, one of your distinguished shepherds and his wife came to visit us when we were living in the Washington, D.C. area because they were living in the Richmond, Virginia area. And Greg and Janet came to see us, and we had a great time. It was around the 4th of July, and we went to the fireworks, and they stayed at our house 2 or 3 days, and we just had a blast. But the thing that we both remember the most was that I had an old minivan that had been wrecked and repaired. And when they repaired the minivan, they fixed everything except one thing. On the passenger side, the windshield washer didn't shoot at the windshield. It shot out that way. And it would shoot about 10 feet. It was a super soaker before there was a super soaker. And so we would drive around. Greg would sit in the passenger side, and we'd drive around, and he'd say, "Hey, there's a guy on a bicycle. Get him." And I'd hit the button for the washer, and shoo, that water would squirt out. I mean, the guy, it was, what is it, a cloud in the sky, and the guy's going, like this. And Greg, we'd go down the road, Greg, "Hey, there's a guy walking, get him," And then, so these two mature men, driving around, squirting people, like two college kids, I guess. We had a blast, didn't we? We had a blast. Some of you have asked why I drove and Julie flew. It's because we don't travel together. Actually, I was in a meeting in Mississippi and ended Friday night. And since I was already 5-6 hours this direction, I just, instead of doubling back, I just came on. And then she flew. And I brought the truck because I knew if we were coming to Texas, she'd invariably try to buy something and have to haul it back home. But the funny thing was, last week I was in a meeting, listen carefully, in Houston at the Southside congregation in Houston, Mississippi. Houston, Mississippi is the capital or the county seat of Chickasaw County, Mississippi. Small town of about 4,000 or 5,000 people, and the congregation is on the south side. So I had to be really careful when they were saying, "You going home Saturday?" "No, I'm going to the Southside congregation in Houston," and you're already here. I mean, so everything has sort of been kind of confusing a little bit. Turn in your Bibles, if you haven't, to Proverbs 4. Let's begin reading in verse 1. Proverbs 4, verse 1. Here is a parent who just has some things to say for his child, his son. "Hear, O sons, the instruction of a father, and give attention that you may gain understanding. For I give you sound teaching. Do not abandon my instruction. When I was a son to my father, tender and the only son in the sight of my mother, he taught me, and he said to me, 'Let your heart hold fast my words. Keep my commandments and live. Acquire wisdom. Acquire understanding. Do not forget nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her,'" that is wisdom. "She will guard you. Love her, and she will watch over you." The beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom. "And with all of your acquiring, get understanding. Prize her, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a garland of grace. She will present you with a crown of beauty. Hear, my son, and accept my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. I have directed you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in upright paths. When you walk, your steps will not be impeded. And if you run, you will not stumble. Take hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. In fact, the first 7 chapters of Proverbs are just like this. They're the instructions of parents to children about wisdom in various areas of life. These are tough times for a parent. I mean, we are up against an onslaught of Satan culture that is unprecedented in our lives. And it is easy for us as moms and dads to just check out, to adopt the position that hear no evil, see no evil, I don't want to know. And so it is that the choppy waters of the single-digit years, 6, 7, 8, 9, become full-fledged class 4 rapids as a young person enters into the tween years, 10, 11, 12, and then into the teen years, 13, 14, 15, and beyond. And sad, some parents just give in. They give in to culture and just go along with the flow because they don't want the hassles. Or they don't want to do anything that could possibly make my child get mad at me. Or deprive my child of all of the things that culture says they have to have at this age. So I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but there is a definite cultural shift in the way that parents parent these days. And I don't know when that started. This societal shift from the authority being in the hands of mom and dad to now the authority being in the hands of the kids. And in many families, what the kids want, what the kids think, what the kids like, is more important than the parental guidance of wisdom like you read in Proverbs 1 through 7. And so let's let the kids decide becomes the mantra of 21st century parenting. So how am I as a parent? How am I as a parent to navigate these upside down times in which we live? How do I raise my kids without losing my mind? How do I train up a child in the way he should go when God says go this way and culture says go this way? And yet we need to understand that this is nothing new. Isaiah said in Isaiah 5 and verse 20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Woe to those who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness. So really, it's been going on a long time. But never in our lifetime has there been such a collapse, a colossal collapse of parenting. And if you think you can solve the problem by sitting in a pew 2 or 3 times a week with your kids, or if you think you can solve a problem by sending them to a school where their teachers are Christians, and that's just going to solve everything, all I can say is you are woefully naive. In Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 14, Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse 14, this great leader of the people in the rebuilding of the walls around Jerusalem. In Nehemiah 4 and verse 14, Nehemiah sees the fear in the eyes and the hearts of these people. And he says, when I saw their fear, I rose and I spoke to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, fight for your sons, fight for your daughters, fight for your wives, fight for your houses. Some things are worth fighting for. And if we're going to raise up the next generation to know God and to be servants of Jesus, then we're going to have to fight for them. Let me make a couple of points, and then we'll go to application, because there's so many things we could talk about today. Let me make a point about the culture of perverted sexuality in which we live. The culture of perverted sexuality. You know that the internet and the smartphone has changed everything? Do you know that in your child's hand, when they hold a smartphone, that instrument has over 1 million times greater power than the best NASA computers during the Apollo age? Houston, we don't have a problem. We have a big problem. Pornography is a click away. Pedophilia, child trafficking, scams of every sort. The availability of evil has never been greater. I want to show you something in Romans chapter 1. In this chapter where Paul describes his age, which in the language of Romans 1 is very much like our own. But I want to zero in at something he says in this list of things, verse 28, verse 29, verse 30, 31, 32. As Paul lists all of these evil things of depravity that was in his time, he says in verse 30, we'll jump right into the middle of the list, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, and then he says, inventors of evil. That's interesting. Because about the time that you think Satan has invented every kind of evil imaginable, he finds another way to market his product. Inventors of evil. Our kids are target one. And Christian kids are just as susceptible as everybody else. And it is killing our families. And it is killing churches. And the latest cult worship of perverted sexuality, in which we are just getting inundated, is homosexuality and lesbianism and bisexuality and transsexuality. Can girls become boys? Can boys become girls? Our culture says yes. Culture says the biological differences between boys and girls really doesn't matter. And yet our God, from the very beginning in creation, has designed all of nature to tell us the truth. And all of nature tells us the truth even when people don't want to hear the truth. One professor at the University of Tennessee said, I don't like the word truth because it is so transphobic. It implies there is right and wrong. So who is it that assigns gender? Do we get a chance to choose our gender identification, regardless of biology? Biology hasn't changed. Reality hasn't changed. Or has it? In our day, reality has become whatever you think it is. If it's your reality, then it's your reality. Let me tell you how dumb that is. Picking on Greg this morning. Let's say I take Greg outside in the parking lot after our morning gathering, and I'd say, Greg, I want to show you my new Tesla. And I walk over and I say, look, isn't she beautiful? And Greg looks and he says, that's not a Tesla. That's a Chevrolet truck. It's got the bow tie emblem on the back. It says Silverado on the side. I said, I don't care what it says. It's a Tesla. It's a new Tesla. Isn't it beautiful? And Greg says, wait here a minute. And he comes back in here and he gets all the other elders together and he says, we got an issue. This guy's losing his mind. He thinks he's driving a new Tesla. Well, we would laugh about that. We would decide that here's an individual who is out of touch with reality, and that would be correct. We live in a culture, ladies and gentlemen, that is out of touch with reality, that is out of touch with common sense. In fact, sense isn't common anymore. And a large segment of our young people are filled with gender confusion because they are taught that gender is nothing but a social construct, that gender is just something you choose. And yet the chromosomes in our body are clearly marked male, female. You don't get to choose those or be whatever you want to be. And yet our woke elites in the American educational system, politicians, the media, they all seem bent on telling our kids from the age of kindergarten when they first start, you can be whatever gender you want to be. And I must say that is wrong on so many levels. For one thing, it is absolutely impossible. It is impossible for young people to have the mental and emotional maturity and stability to grasp the long-term ramifications of all of that. They can't possibly comprehend that. But what they comprehend is this. Our kids, like kids in every age, long to belong. They want to find a community. They want to find their tribe. And given the access of the internet in our times, that's not hard to do. And so what is born is the cult worship of perverted sexuality. If a 50-year-old man sat at a playground across the street from an elementary school and talked to children about the same thing being taught across the street inside the school, he would be arrested. He would be a pedophile. And I want to know, what's the difference? Do you know the majority of kids are going to make it through adolescence? Adolescence is a tough time for young people. It's a very difficult time for people. And so as a result, that's why Proverbs 1 through 7 come into play. That's why parents have to do everything they can to be there for their kids and to build solid relationships with their children, to keep the communication with their kids strong and the bonds of love strong. Because transgenderism denies the basic core truth of creation, that God made them male and female. And when a Supreme Court nominee cannot answer the question, what is a woman Our nation is in trouble. By the way, last time I checked, a woman is an adult human female. It's not a hard question to answer. I was driving here on Saturday and I caught a bit of news. And after I got here, I went back and wrote it down because I wanted the exact quote. Mayor Eric Adams of New York City came out with this statement to justify drag queens in the public schools of New York City. He says, "Our drag storytellers and the schools that support them are advancing a love of diversity, personal expression, and literacy, which is the core of what we embrace in our schools." You know what's amazing to me? What's amazing to me is that any of us ever learned to read and write without drag queens parading themselves in our schools. It's funny how that worked, you know? And he goes on to say the goal is not only for our children to be academically intelligent, but also to be emotionally intelligent. So explain to me how a man dressed up in a cartoonish sexual costume, explain to me how that creates academic smarts, how that creates emotional intelligence. Paul says in Ephesians 5 and verse 11, in Ephesians, the 5th chapter and verse 11, he says, "Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is disgraceful even to speak of the things which are done by them in secret." Yes, it is. But that's our times. That's our culture. And here we are as parents trying to navigate the maze of all of this. But let me talk about one other thing, then we'll make the application, and that's the culture of disrespect. The culture of disrespect from generation to generation. And you could argue that that's been going on for years. But because of technology, it's not been going on to the level it is today. And I see parents who are tired. I see parents who are tired of being beat up, beat down, beat on, to the point that they just kind of want to throw up their hands because they see their family spinning out of control. One child psychologist said this: Cynthia was rude and hostile to her parents while charming to everyone else. It's amazing how that works. She obsessed about her privacy, insisting that her life was none of her parents' business. As a result, her parents were not allowed to speak with her without being made to feel intrusive. They found it impossible to sustain any conversation with their daughter. You think that's isolated? You think maybe that's just a single case over here, or maybe a few cases over here? And of course, that can never happen in a Christian home. Oh, yes, it can, and does. So let me leave you with some things to consider. I want to give you 7 things to consider. You got something to write with? You got something to write with? Something to write on? I'm going to give you 7 things I want you to consider as a parent. 7 things I want you to consider. Number 1, write this down. You have to figure out your parental motivation. You have to figure out your parental motivation. If you parent from a platform based upon a desire that as a parent, I'm going to make my decisions as a parent because I want my child to always like me, the odds are very high you are not going to achieve that objective. Couple of things. Number 1, your child expects to look up to you. I think there's some hard wiring going in there from creation. But your child expects to look up to you. There's some order in all of this that is God authored. But number two, you have to, as a parent, earn that right. And so as a parent, if I keep caving in and giving in and bailing out, what I'm going to earn from my child is not respect. What I'm going to earn from my child is disrespect. You can count on it. So you have to decide, what is my parental platform? Our parental platform as Christians should be to teach, number one, to be able to teach our children right from wrong. Somebody has to do that. Somebody has to take responsibility for that. That's your job and mine, to teach them right and wrong. Secondly, to teach them responsibility. The Jesus principle that if you're responsible with a little, you can be responsible as a lot. And that continues to grow as they mature. Third, to teach them to be respectful of all people, anywhere they are. Number four, to teach them to own their behaviors, to be accountable, instead of blaming everybody else. To teach them that certain decisions have consequences. They have consequences. But number six, most of all, to teach them about Jesus, to model the example of Jesus. You talk about a parental platform, there it is. And even in the best of families, as you raise your young people through the tween years and the teen years, there's going to be rough and bumpy. It just is. But over time, as they grow and mature, you will earn their respect because you parented from a God position of authority. Don't delegate that. Don't give that away. Number two, write this down. You have to teach your children how to treat you. You have to teach your children how to treat you. Some kids disrespect their parents because the parents allow themselves to be disrespected. Well, first of all, as a parent, if you do not respect yourself, how do you expect your children to ever respect you? And if they don't respect you, do you think they're going to respect a teacher? Do you think they're going to respect an employer? Do you think they're going to respect a policeman who challenges their behavior and holds them accountable? It all starts with parental authority. It starts in the home with mom and dad. You have to teach your children how to treat you so they will know how to treat everybody else. Number three, write this down. You have to allow them. You have to allow them to survive their drama. Don't be a helicopter parent. Good grief. Helicopter parents are always swooping in to rescue the child. Every time the child makes a bad decision, here comes helicopter parent. Now, I'm not talking about something the kid may be involved in that is illegal or unsafe, that requires immediate attention. I'm not talking about that. But how will our children ever learn to think for themselves if they never have a chance to think for themselves and suffer any consequences of any sort for their decisions? Every morning in elementary, middle, and high schools across this nation, every morning, the offices are filled with helicopter parents who show up because their child forgot their field trip permission slip. Their child didn't bring the right shoes for gym. Their child left their homework at home. Here comes helicopter parent to the rescue. When we decided how to educate the children that we adopted, we were zoned for a high school that had about 3,000 students. And that would have been overwhelming to these kids who were raised in an orphanage in the mountains of Bulgaria. It would have been overwhelming to them. But out on the fringe of our county is a little community of about 500 people. And in that community, there's a very small K through 12 school that operates pretty independently, although in the county system. So they had granted us the right to bring our children there to that school because they and us thought it would be helpful to their education. And it certainly was. The problem was it was 25 miles from home. So I would drive and drop them off 25 miles. I would drive and pick them up, or sometimes Julie and I would trade, and we would drive 100 miles a day, just taking them to and from school. So one morning, we're going to school. Leah's in the front seat. We're going to school, and we were about mile 22 out of 25. And she screeches, and she says, "Dad, stop the car, pull over." And so I go, pull over. I think she's sick. She's sick. So I pull over real quick, and I say, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" She said, "Dad, we have to go home." I said, "Why?" She said, "I forgot my chapstick." Crisis. I didn't go home. I said, deal with it, deal with it. And then there's the Black Hawk attack parents. These are the parents, my child will never face disappointment. My child will never face discouragement. My child will never face consequences. My child, well, you get the idea. And the Black Hawk attack parents drop smart bombs on any teacher, on any coach, even college administrators who would dare throw a flag against their child's behavior or hold them accountable. Tommy, I'm sure that never happened, Shane, at Florida College. Certainly not. Moms and dads, teach your kids to survive their drama. Instead of saying to your child, "Why did you do that?" Because you're going to get the same answer every time. Oh. Don't ask them why they did that, because you already know the answer that you're going to get. Instead, ask them this question. What do you think you should do about that? Or how do you think you might better handle that next time? Or help me understand why that wasn't a very good decision. What are you doing? You're helping your child learn to think for himself. Number 4, you have to be okay even if they're not okay. You as a parent have to be okay, even if they're not okay. All any of us can do is the best we can. And none of us are perfect. The line of imperfect parents is really long. But at some point in time, after you've done the best you can possibly do, at some point in time as they grow up and they make a bad decision, that's on them, not you. In Luke the 15th chapter, that famous story of Jesus about the prodigal, there is so much backstory to that Jesus doesn't tell us. He doesn't fill in a lot of the blanks. But I'm guessing that dad knew that boy better than did anybody. And I'm guessing that dad has seen his son progress and progress and progress in the wrong direction till finally the boy takes his money and leaves. Here's the interesting thing about that. Daddy didn't chase after him. Did you notice that? Daddy stayed home. Does that mean that his dad didn't care about him? Does that mean the dad didn't pray for him? Does that mean that the dad didn't hope against hope that something would happen to change the heart of his son? Why, we know the answer to all of that. But that dad knew his son better than did anybody. And the Bible says, and no one was giving anything to him. There was no helicopter people landing to rescue. And it was one of the things that eventually helped to bring that son to his senses. If you don't take care of you, how will you be there for them. And so I ask, what are you doing to take care of you? Number 5, you have to outpatient them. You have to outpatient them. 1 Corinthians 13:4, love is patient. Teens tend to spin everything up. And in spinning things up, they love to spin their parents up. So you and I have to make a decision to step back and not get caught up in the spin cycle. Proverbs 15:1, a gentle answer turns away wrath. But sometimes the spin cycle just gets going so fast and crazy, and the blaming and the deflecting and the talking in circles. I don't know about you, but I get tired of talking in a cul-de-sac. Round, around, around you go. We get nowhere. And sometimes as a parent, what you have to do is simply step away and say, listen, I love you too much to talk about that right now. And walk away. And as you walk away with your back to them, say this. By the way, honey, I have more love for you than you have eye rolls for me. And they're going to go, how'd she know? You have to outpatient them. Number 6, you have to pick your battles. Not everything is worth a war. But whatever you pick, you have to win. I know a mom who told her son, you have to clean your room. And he kept putting it off. And he comes bounding down the stairs and he says, Mom, I'm ready to go to soccer practice. And she says, I only take boys to soccer practice who've cleaned their room. And he says, oh, Mom, I'll do it as soon as soccer practice is over. I'll come home and I'll clean my room. I promise I'll do it. I'll take care of it. She says, no, you don't understand. I only take boys to soccer practice who've cleaned their room. And he says, Mom, come on, we're going to be late. If we're late, the coach is going to make me run laps after practice. And she says, maybe you didn't hear me. I only take boys to soccer practice who've cleaned their room. She didn't budge. And she said the next sound she heard was an interesting sound that she had not heard in that house upstairs in a long time. A vacuum cleaner. And he cleaned his room and he came down and she took him to soccer practice and she said, you know, I stayed there all through soccer practice. She said, I even stayed late because I kind of enjoyed watching him run all of those laps. You got to pick your battles. And number 7, finally, you have to use your leverage. You have to use your leverage. As long as they live in your house, as long as they eat your food, as long as they sleep under your roof, you have leverage. Teenagers think sometimes that everything they want is a right. It is not. In fact, there's a big difference between rights and privileges. Driving is a privilege. Going out is a privilege. A phone is a privilege. The privacy of a room is a privilege. I've heard young people say, it's my room, I can do whatever I want. You know, last time I checked, that room is connected to a house. And that house is my house. And that's how that works. Alex came home from school one day. We're having some behavioral attitude issues. He came home from school, went up to his room, and I just waited downstairs. I didn't say a word. I just waited. And all of a sudden, he hollers, "Where's my door?" I said, number one, it's not your door. It's my door. And I've borrowed it for a while. You know how easy it is to take a door off the hinges? I said, you can have your door back when I see some changes in behavior and attitudes. Our kids have rights. Don't get me wrong. They have rights. They have a right to be loved. They have a right to be fed. They have a right to be clothed. They have a right to have a roof over their head. They have a right to be protected. They have a right to be educated. They have a lot of those rights. But everything else is a privilege. And if you don't think you have leverage, let me tell you what to do. You make an appointment with the school counselor and you go and have a face-to-face conversation and make all the arrangements that need to be made. And then you go into the school cafeteria at the appointed time, and you sit down and you eat lunch with your teenage child in front of all of their friends. And you go back the next day for the same, and the next day, until an attitude and behavior begins to change. They will be motivated. Believe me, they will be motivated. In the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses gathers all of these parents together. And they were young parents. Because if you know Old Testament history, you know that all of the old folks, they've died in the wilderness. And so Moses is talking to all of these parents. And in the very first verse of Deuteronomy chapter 6, he says, God has commanded me to tell you this. Commanded. And in verse 2 of Deuteronomy 6, Moses talks about, I'm going to tell you some things that you and your son and your grandson need to know. And the interesting thing about that, most of them didn't have grandkids. Now, some of them did. But many of them weren't old enough to have grandkids. And so Moses says, I'm going to talk to you and I want to talk about your son. And I want to talk about kids who aren't even here yet. And then down around verse 4 and 5, he says, listen, you, before he tells anything to them about teach them diligently, talk to them when they sit in that, before he ever says that, he says, you must love the Lord your God with all of your heart and your soul and your might. Who's he talking to? Parents. And he's saying, don't try to give your kids something you don't have. Because kids can see through hypocrisy so fast. You be the Christian that you need to be. You be the God follower you need to be. And then he says, teach them diligently. That's structured teaching. And then he says, talk to them when they sit in your house, when they walk by the way, when they lie down, when they write. That's unstructured teaching. That's everyday opportunities as it comes to talk to your kids. But the point is, you be the person and the parent you need to be so that you will have something to talk to your kids about. These are tough times, unprecedented in our life. And I don't see things getting better. Let us pray and let us show our kids the example that they're not going to see anywhere else. Parents, it's a heavy-duty responsibility God has given us. We got one shot. Make the most of it. Thank you for your kind attention this morning.